Learning goals. So this is my job. This is hopefully what I'm going to do today. When you guys leave this webinar today, what I want you to do is I want you to be able to create a basic T-table that matches your skills with the needed skills listed on the job description. And I know some people are already going, oh, I know this. I've heard this before. Come on, Robin. Seriously, there is a reason why I go through this a lot. Because it is important. It is what is getting people jobs these days. That's why we make a big deal out of it. The other thing is, I want you to be able to name 3 advantages of networking. I know that networking is kind of a eye-roll inducing concept. It is to me, and I've spent my life talking. That doesn't necessarily mean I like to do it all the time. So hopefully I'm going to be able to let you know why it's actually in your best interest to do it. Next 2 bullet points kind of go together. To be able to understand when and why it's important to leave off experience and qualifications that go beyond the company's needs, because we found there's a real definite correlation between that and being seen as overqualified. So we're going to be addressing that big issue of how can I avoid seeming like I'm overqualified. And finally, successfully keep the momentum of the job search going for as long as it takes, because that's another thing that people say is tough. They start going gangbusters, and then all of a sudden it becomes a little more difficult. Now, I want to start with some good news, because there's enough bad news around these days. But before we do that, I want to do one other thing. I want to get you guys used to typing things into the chat box. And I love how many people were greeting and talking about where they were, and we were talking about the weather and all that kind of stuff. But I want you guys to do a little interaction here. So before we get to the good news, I want to hear from you in just one word. So I want you to type in just one word. Describe job searching over the age of 40 or 50 or 62, or, pick your age. Describe job searching over this age in one word. If somebody had to say, all right? And of course, obviously, don't use any words you wouldn't use in a professional interview, even though you might want to. Scary, challenging, tiring, intimidating, very difficult, frustrating, slow, confusing, difficult, daunting, frustrating. Absolutely. Yeah, patience is wearing. Yeah, I hear you. Absolutely. Discouraging. Fun. Oh, yay. Somebody. There we go. Fun. I hope that wasn't a sarcastic fun. Oh, did somebody say insidious? I have really bad eyesight, and it's hard for me to see, but I love it. Anyway, okay. Honestly, and keep them coming if you haven't typed yet. Go ahead and keep them coming. All of these are totally relevant and totally appropriate. I do get a kick out of it every now and then when people do say it's fun, it's challenging, it's a positive thing. All of these are totally true. I'm hoping that by the end of the day, I'm not kidding myself. I don't have a magic spell that I can do, and everybody leaves here going, oh, I'm totally excited about this. But hopefully by the end of the day, you're going to feel a little more empowered. You're going to feel like, okay, I've got a plan, and that's kind of what I'm shooting for. Okay. So thank you for that. I appreciate that. Let's go on to the good news here while you guys are continuing to type those. Seriously, a recent article in the Harvard Business Review has given us kind of hopeful news that employers are looking to experienced workers to help them through the crisis of trying to rebuild after the pandemic. Now, there are return to work programs, actually, that people are starting. Some of them take the form of returnships. Can you believe it? That's really a thing. It's internships for experienced workers who simply need to update their skills, or direct hires. But why? Why are they looking to experienced workers? Well, experienced workers can have the edge over their younger counterparts by bringing to the table things like institutional knowledge, education, work experience, mature perspective, stable life stage, dedication, loyalty, and energy and enthusiasm for the job at hand. Now, I'm living, breathing proof that older workers can actually get successfully employed with companies that are traditionally younger employees. The job that I had before this was with a tech company. And basically, I was brought in because of my soft skills, because I had experience in adapting to clients' ever-changing needs. And that was a big problem that he shared with me, that the team was young and they couldn't stop on a dime and go to another direction when the client wanted them to, and it was difficult for them. So basically what I'm finding since working here is that many older workers forget to promote their soft skills. They're so focused on the hard skills, they're not thinking about the soft skills. Okay, so what is soft skills? Soft skills are people skills. Things like adaptability, emotional intelligence, mentoring, cool-headedness. And I personally think that the reason that these skills don't get promoted is that they come so naturally to us. We don't think about them as being formal skills. We don't think about bragging, which is really not bragging, about them simply because we just do it. So we're going to be talking a lot about that, but that can be a skill gap for the younger employees that just haven't been to enough rodeos yet, that they haven't developed these skills. So, all right. What I want to do is I want to talk about what has changed since last you were in the workforce. So if you have been out of the workforce for a significant amount of time, or you have been working in sustained employment for many years, you may find that resume writing, interviewing, the job search itself has changed. What used to work may or may not work now. Those of you who work in fields where employment changes often, you might be aware of some of the things that I'm talking about, but actually there's some things that are going to be valuable for you folks as well. So in this section, we're going to be talking about the need to match your skills to the job listed, not just listing all the things you do well. They need to be able to see a correlation immediately and efficiently. We're also going to be talking about the vital importance of networking, which I would argue is easier now with technology than it was before. We're going to be talking about teleconferencing. So I think when I started doing this webinar, everybody was brand new to teleconferencing. I think more people are getting a little bit used to it, but we're still going to cover, some tips and some advice regarding interviewing. And finally, we're going to be talking about you yourself. Now, oftentimes we don't give a lot of thought to how we ourselves have changed since the last time we interviewed for a job, and how these changes affect both positively and negatively how we self-market. So let's jump right into it. As I said, I'm going to move fairly quickly here, but hopefully you guys are putting in questions as they're occurring to you. Okay, so matching your skills to the skills listed. Historically, resumes were written chronologically, and even some interviews were conducted that way. And you basically listed the duties of your most recent job at the top, and you worked your way down from there. In this model, the responsibility was on the hiring manager to make a connection between what you'd done before and what he or she wanted you to do now. Pretty much all accomplishments were considered important, even if they weren't necessarily directly relevant to the job pursued. By the way, I'm going to throw in a sidebar here. Chronological resumes are still being used in certain instances today, so they've not gone away. But I would say reach out to a Career Force staff member and ask them to help you decide which type of resume is going to be best for telling your story. Now, these days, employers want to see directly and quickly the actual experience and accomplishments you have that directly relate to the skills listed on the job description and that make you the perfect fit for that company's needs. So one way you can do this is by using the T-chart or the T-table. Now, if this is new concept for you, by the way, this is not something that you hand to an interviewer or you email to an interviewer or a hiring manager. This is something that you do on your own and you keep. It's just an exercise to help you prepare to define how you are the best fit for the position. So, the first thing you do is draw a big old T on a piece of paper. Next, you're going to want to list keywords from the job description in the left column. Now, by the way, we do have webinars that kind of dig into this a little bit more and talk about how do you find those keywords and phrases. But it's basically, in a nutshell, you're going to want to read the job description and highlight, and I literally physically highlight, what are the things that they want to do. So in this sample, I've highlighted things like they want somebody with experience recruiting team members. They want somebody with experience as a human resources business partner. They want somebody to work with various departments to determine candidate skills. Next, write out your accomplishments or experiences that match those keywords or phrases. So in this case, okay, recruiting team members, I've exceeded all recruitment goals by attending job fairs and sourcing new applicants from various job boards. You want somebody who, I'm going to jump down, work with various departments to determine candidate skills? Great! I've collaborated with hiring managers in order to develop candidate profiles and attract top talent. Okay? So this process, by doing this exercise, it's going to give you a clear picture of how you fit this position. It's going to prepare talking points. You're going to know what you're going to want to emphasize. And sometimes it'll even give you an idea of, hey, do I want to go for this job? Do I have enough? Is there enough of a match where I feel like I could go in and be really competitive? Okay. All right. So like I said, I'm moving fast. We're already going to move over to networking here. But again, we're going to have plenty of time for questions as we're going on. Okay. The statistics with networking are consistent. 75 to 80% of jobs come from knowing somebody who knows somebody. And a sobering reality is that there are many jobs that are available that simply will not appear on job boards. I'm sure you guys know this, but if you're spending all your time on job boards and that's all you're looking for, there's going to be jobs you're going to miss out on because they're just not there. These jobs are advertised through word of mouth and associations, company-related websites, etc. So networking and informational interviews can really help experienced workers, especially one who's not been on the job hunting trail for a long time. So for example, let's say that you want to make a career change and get into something that you've never done, or maybe like I did, go back into something that you haven't done for years. Now, the big question for you folks is going to be, do you have the skills that will make you competitive? The best people to give you that answer are the ones who are actually doing the work you seek. Find those folks. Ask them to review your resume, give you candid feedback as to whether they think you're out of the box ready, or whether you need to update your credentials. This is what I did when I went back into teaching after being away from it for a long time. I asked people who are currently doing the kind of training I wanted to get into, do you think I'm competitive? It's not just enough to get into the interview, but I needed to be competitive, and I got some really great answers. Networking and informational interviews can also access whether or not you even want to do that career change. You know, after talking with somebody in a field, you may discover that that new job idea is not exactly what you want, and that is fine. You can back out of that road and head down another one. Talking to people that are who are doing the work you want to do can also give you insider tips about where to find the job, what specifically will employers want to hear. I found out that I was writing my resume and using the wrong language, so that was helpful for me to hear. They can tell you what the important software is, whether there's certifications that would put you over the top, and as I said, what kind of language to use. Now, another advantage to networking is that you can find out about jobs before they are posted. Insiders sometimes can share things like, well, really, there's nothing in the department right now, but I can tell you they are budgeting for a position, and it sounds exactly what you're looking for, and we're going to know more in a couple of months. And finally, more experienced workers are choosing to focus on specific companies or organizations rather than wait for jobs to be posted. Now, right now, think about a company that really interests you, or maybe an organization. Research it thoroughly. Find out what it's currently doing in your particular area. Review your qualifications, especially the skills that you have that are going to be valuable in this current time of difficulty. And then reach out and meet them. It can be something as simple as a quick phone call or an email. Let them know that you are simply opening the door to a possible relationship. You're not expecting them to create a position for you right away. Because if you push too hard initially, that can be kind of off-putting for them. But you just want to let them know you just like to, you really believe in their organization, and you just basically want to set something up for a possibility down the line. Now, I talked about the other thing that's changed, and a big thing right now is just how we do these interviews, and that's teleconferencing. So, again, there have been people who have expressed a little bit of concern about having to conduct an interview over the internet and not necessarily feeling real comfortable with the technology. So, the following tips that I'm going to give you are going to assume that you have access to a computer with a camera and a microphone. If you do not, give us a call. We will be happy to troubleshoot with you. So don't feel like you're going to be out of contention simply because you can't teleconference right now. I think, I don't know, most of the things that I've been hearing is that people are still pretty much doing the interviews over the internet at this point. There are going to be times when people will need to interview in person. So we will help you regardless of where you're at. Okay, so this is primarily aimed at people who are not that familiar with teleconferencing, haven't done it a lot. The good news is you're doing it now. So I do encourage you, if you haven't done it a lot and you're still a little nervous about it, to just get yourself familiar. Find family and friends that are on Zoom. Zoom is really easy and it's super. You don't have to be familiar with the platform that the company uses. Remember, they're going to try to make it really, really easy for you. The last thing they want to do is set up some complicated process that's going to confuse candidates and take time navigating through. But I would say, do something quick and easy like Teams or Zoom or whatever it is so that you just get used to doing it so it's not quite so anxiety producing. Okay, next set up your background. Background, yes. So the background is what you're seeing here. Okay. Now, they've actually done this. They've actually done polls in the last year and they've talked to employers about these fake backgrounds that maybe you've heard about or you've seen. It's the backgrounds that will blur out everything behind you, or you can be standing in front of the, uh, you know, I'm trying to think of a famous, I don't know, Statue of Liberty. You can pretty much put anything behind you. Here's the thing to think about though before you do that. Employers don't like them. Overwhelmingly, they did not like the fake backgrounds. And it's true. If you've ever seen anybody in front of a fake background and they move real quick and half their head disappears, and it's not a good look. So basically, the biggest thing to remember is choose a background that doesn't compete with you. If you've got a lot of busy stuff, and I would even say my background here is a little busy, busier than it needs to be. If you've got artwork or something that's going to draw people's attention away from you, if you've got obviously if you've got a whole house full of people walking back and forth, that doesn't work. So the important thing is that make sure that you look your best. Just in front of a blank wall, that does tend to look a little cold. I would try to avoid that as well. Something as simple as a simple piece of artwork where everybody can tell, okay, that is a ship, that is a flower. So they're not trying to decipher what's behind you. A simple bookcase, that kind of thing is what they're looking for. Okay. Choose good lighting. Choose lighting that is complementary. We're discovering that in our team meetings. There's always a few people that are lit beautifully and they look warm and healthy and everything is fine. And then there's other people that complain and they say, oh, I look washed out compared to you. So basically what I would say is just avoid sitting right in front of a window because then you're going to be in silhouette. Avoid sitting right next to a window that's going to give you a lot of harsh light because again, there you're going to kind of be washed out. Basically, make sure that they can see your expressions. Expressions are going to be extremely important. They're going to want to see you smile. They're going to want to see what your expressions are like. All right, dress as you would for a face-to-face interview, even down to your shoes. Why am I getting so specific about shoes? It's psychological. You're going to feel differently if you are wearing the entire outfit and feeling like you are at an interview than if you're dressing, from the waist on up. So I do encourage you to do the whole thing. Um, in terms of specifics, now here is where I would recommend going to us individually and asking specific questions. Generally speaking, you want to wear something that's kind of muted, that isn't going to be, kind of neon and drawing attention to yourself, but at the same time looks nice. I'm not going to spend any more time on that right now because I think that is more of a one-to-one kind of a thing. Oh, good eye contact and smile. Okay. So here's the thing. I apologize for this. This is one of these things where I have to say kind of do as I say and not as I do. I have really bad eyesight and I've got two huge monitors over here, and it's easier for me to look at my notes here than it is here, where the screen is significantly smaller. However, The important thing is when you are interviewing that you are making eye contact, and how you do that is you look into the camera lens. Now, the nice thing about interviewing via teleconferencing is that you can put in little reminders to yourself that you can't do face to face. So I do encourage you, if you need to remind yourself for eye contact and to smile and all of that, you can take a Post-it note. I'm going to point at the camera now. Be ready. You can put it right here, and you can put it right here. You can put it all over the place as long as you're not covering up the lens. And the other thing that I would say is the big thing is practice. Practice, practice, practice. So that you can kind of tell, and get friends and family members and career force staff to listen to you and to watch you and to give you feedback about you were smiling just right, or you could smile a little bit, a little bit more and that kind of thing. All right. Oh, the last thing is, no, second to last thing is audio. Now, audio, I got to tell you, this has got to come from you, and this has got to be kind of a trial and error situation. We've discovered here at Career Force that an audio trick that works for one person may not work for another. So you're almost going to have to try various audio things. Generally speaking, you're going to sound better if you're wearing a headset. I find that when I'm at home, working at home, when nobody else is around me, I'll frequently just use the audio on my computer, and it works, but it does sound a little echoey. So you're going to want to find out the thing that works best. Last bit of advice on this, and then I'm going to move on. And this is probably the big takeaway. If you forget everything else, okay, but please remember this. Always have a contact phone number of the interviewer on hand, and really, really easy to find. Things happen. Things have happened in the middle of this webinar. You can never tell with technology. You want to make sure that you've got their phone number right there beside you. So in case something goes and they can't see you, they can't hear you, whatever, you can call them quickly and get instructions as to what they want to do next. All right, I'm mindful of the time, so I'm going to move on here. Again, keep those questions coming to Marnie as you're listening. The final thing that may have changed since you last interviewed is you. And take some time to think about the following. How do you feel about looking for employment now? And do those feelings show? Now, of course, if you're really enthusiastic about the idea, that's fantastic to let the show. The person at the beginning, when we were doing the one-word exercise that said fun, okay, that's very cool. But if your feelings are negative, if you still have some emotional leftovers from your last employment or resentment about having to look for work now, this could be a problem. And it's recommended that you reach out to somebody in your life that you trust to be straightforward with you. Ask them if they pick up on any bitterness or resentment or just plain struggle to move on when you're talking about your last position. If they are, feel free to reach out to us, because we can help you find ways of talking about your current job search in a positive and an effective way. Okay? Now, next, evaluate your skills. You've accumulated many, many skills, both on the job and just plain living your life. What makes you a better candidate today than you were the last time? What have you learned or gotten better at? And again, think about those things that maybe younger employees have yet to learn. There's a ton of things I've learned as an older employee that I did not have back in my 20s. And I'm going to be wanting to kind of make a list of those things, okay? Because those things are going to be important. And finally, what are your goals? Now, they're almost certain to ask you what about this. It's going to be really important that you have a specific answer. Now, here's the thing. Your goal may be to retire in 3 years. But I would advise you to work with us about how to answer that question carefully so that it's honest, but it's also something that won't take you out of consideration. Because remember, they have their agenda as well. Your goal might be to retire in 3 years, but if they are bringing you on for a position that they want you to grow in, and they want this work to continue, and they want continuity, somebody who's basically indicating that they're going to leave may or may not be the candidate they want. So again, I would suggest reaching out and working with us about specifically how to answer that question. Okay, what I want to do now is move on to the mistakes that employers tell us experienced candidates often make. Now, this is coming directly from the employers themselves. The common stumbling blocks are, and you guys know it because we all know it, being seen as overqualified, losing momentum, just kind of losing that enthusiasm for continuing to virtually hit the pavement, letting your narrative be negative, again, what I just got done talking about, and not updating your skills. So these are the stumbling blocks that employers are seeing rather, that experienced workers are making. So let's dig down here. Let's just jump into some of these. The most common reason candidates are perceived to be overqualified is that they have listed too many accomplishments on their resume, or they have listed accomplishments and skills that are unrelated to the job that is open. Now, I had somebody ask me very, very pointedly, and I'm glad they did. They said, "So are you talking about dumbing down our resume, Robin?" And I said, "Absolutely not." I said, let me use a sales analogy as a way of illustrating my point. Let's say you're trying to sell a used laptop that you have to a friend of yours. It's in great shape. And they're thinking that they want a new laptop. Let's say that you are really into photography and you've got a lot of photo editing software that's loaded onto this laptop, and you're going to leave it on that laptop at no extra charge because it's really cool and you think they're really going to enjoy it. What happens if they don't like to take pictures? What happens if this software is of no value to them at all? Now, that software is a legitimate value to somebody, but it isn't going to be to them. So what I'm talking about is not dumbing down. I'm talking about lasering your resume and your interview and talking about the things they value. Because if you talk about other things that are of value to you but not them, it's going to fall on deaf ears, or, as we're going to talk about in a sec, it might be sending the wrong message. So bringing out of the sales thing, another example would be a former restaurant manager who genuinely wants to obtain a position as a cook, and I worked with this person. Now, they might be sending the wrong message if their resume includes accomplishments like reducing operating costs. Now, that's a fantastic accomplishment, and they're probably really proud of it. But the hiring manager for the cook position might wonder if this person will be tempted to offer advice to their boss about how the kitchen should be run. A better bet would be for that person to focus on the skills that are listed on the job description and not to add other accomplishments that are achieved at a higher level. Now, by the way, a skills-based resume would probably be best in a scenario like this. Chances are skills-based resumes are really, really good for experienced workers that really want to put the focus on the skill match and not the other stuff. It's also smart to think carefully about how including unrelated accomplishments as well. Okay, so let's say that you started a model for neighborhood philanthropy, neighborhood giving, and it took off and people really, really liked it. It got media attention and several other cities kind of copied it, and it went really, really well. Now, this again is a great accomplishment, but could that mention be sending the wrong message that they might be bored in the job that you're going for? If the job that you're going for is you sit at a computer all day long, talking about this really great innovative idea, could it be possibly sending them the message, oh man, they're in my job, they're not going to want to stick around? So again, think about the message that you might be sending by those accomplishments. How are they going to be perceived positively? How might they be perceived negatively? Now, moving on to the interview, it's important to remember that Generations M, or millennials, and Generation Zs are the folks who are going to be interviewing you. Now, these generations are highly collaborative. They're very, very team-oriented. Now, here's the possible problem. If you've been the boss for many years, it can be really, really easy to slip into boss mode and speak like you did when you were in charge. That can come across as threatening or off-putting. You might be like me. You might naturally speak with confidence. I was a daughter of two teachers. And one of them was a speech teacher. So I've learned just naturally to speak with confidence. But again, people who speak with a lot of confidence can sometimes be misunderstood as somebody who may not want to listen to teammates or consider their point of view. It can be a really tricky line to walk, so here's where mock interviewing is a great way to practice techniques of looking for opportunities of communicating that you really look forward to a chance to fit in with their established team. Okay? One of the biggest challenges that people report about looking for work as an experienced worker is just running out of steam. Many seekers share that, they start out again, they got loads of enthusiasm and motivation and organization and goals and all that kind of stuff. But then they find that family commitments pop up, frustration gets the better of them, they just plain lose their drive. So if you're determined to obtain employment, make goals for yourself now, obviously, but also seek out a support network that will help you stick to the plan. I always recommend thinking about it like a marathon rather than a sprint. And just like a marathon runner needs hydration and fuel all the way through the race, you will too. Now, you may snag a position shortly after starting your search, and that is great, and I'm always pleased when that happens. But don't beat yourself up if that doesn't happen. Things are challenging these days. It calls for endurance, okay? And that's practically a whole class by itself. All righty. A common mistake is unintentionally coming across as negative. And this is really the one that gets people because it's unintentional. They don't realize they're doing it. As I mentioned earlier, if you have some residual bitterness regarding a former employer, seek assistance in finding truthful, neutral language to use when talking about them. Because if a new employer gets the impression that they're interviewing a really judgmental person who's sitting there with a lot of emotional baggage, it's going to be natural for them to choose the other candidate who's excited and positive and enthusiastic about the new opportunity. Now, obviously, it goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. This is not to say create fake excitement. They're gonna spot that immediately. But I always tell people, leave the baggage at the door, bring in your skills and your accomplishments instead. I am going to throw this out here. I think a lot of people know this, but I'm going to throw it out anyway. Be careful about word choice. The words fired and laid off are not interchangeable. Laid off means that you lost your job because your organization closed or restructured, downsized, moved, or there was no longer a need for your particular position. A lot of people have been laid off due to COVID-19. There is nothing to be ashamed about. That has happened. The word fired is a very negative word. I would suggest using a more neutral word if that is literally what happened. Using the term, which is technically the right term for it, involuntary separation. And I would highly encourage you to overcome the understandable discomfort and work with us on that. There might be some times where it was your bad. And sometimes it is, well, all the time in that case, it's best to own up to it. If you were fired, do not represent yourself as laid off because they do background checks and they could discover the truth pretty quickly. The one thing that I will also say is being fired happens much more often than you know. And we've had back when we could have classes where people were in the room and they were sharing, people were amazed at how many people sitting in the room was in their situation. So again, I would say reach out to us and we will help you address those skills. Okay, I'm just about done. I'm just about ready to open it up for questions. But last thing, finally, take a good look at your skill set. If you've been employed with the same organization for 30 years, you have a solid set of skills that your particular organization needed you to have. However, when you go out exploring other organizations, you may find that other skills might be needed. Sometimes it's just not enough to be willing to learn. Think about it. A hiring manager has two candidates. One candidate says, well, I may not have personal experience with this particular software, but I'm certainly willing to learn. But the other candidate says, yes, I've used this software for the past 3 years in my previous position, and here are my specific accomplishments using it. The importance of that software may determine who gets that job. Now, you might be interested in going back to work that you did many, many years ago. Now, again, depending on the nature of the work, even having a degree in that area may not entirely be what you need to be qualified. For example, someone who attained a degree and a teaching license in the 80s, Robin, teaching is one of those vocations that changes a lot. Okay. The whole point is that what I learned back in the 80s, I mean, there's a lot of it that's still absolutely relevant, but there's also some key things that are not. And the point is that if I wanted to return to the classroom, which I did not terribly long ago, the important thing is to know what the current teaching approaches are, what software is currently being used, and certainly today the most important thing is how can you create viable education online? There are times when you will need to update your skills. As I've stated earlier, talking to people who are currently doing the work that you want to pursue is a good way of finding out if you are up to date. And we can help you. There's Dislocated Worker Services that can help you obtain licensures and certifications. So reach out to us. I think I've got some old, no, I guess that's pretty good. No, I still have reference to Coursera, so I'm going to move on from that. Okay, there we are. So I'm not too far behind. We do have several minutes to open this up. So let's talk now about your questions. Let's dig into the stuff that you guys are thinking about. So, my friend Marnie, let's hear from you.
Okie dokie. You know we have tons of questions.
Yay.
I did just put in the chat box some information about vocational rehabilitation services. They may be able to help some folks out there that have been talking about injuries and surgeries that they've recently had. So please check that information out in addition to that dislocated worker if you haven't already done that. First, some clarifications and explanation, Robin. Someone asked pretty early on about best practices in order to request one of those informational interviews. And so a clarification really about what an informational interview is and best practices for requesting. But then someone else said, please give me more detail on how to go about doing a mock interview.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So lots of stuff to unpack there. Marnie knows that I'm jumping up and down because I love talking about informational interviews. I love them. So informational interviews are not to be confused with a real interview. In fact, if you go in with the idea of sneaking in your qualifications in the hopes that they will hire you, you could alienate them. Informational interviews are simply a way of getting information about the job to find out, do I even want to get into this? It's also to find really valuable information about how can I be competitive. So super quick, I'm going to give you examples of the two different kinds that I've used in my own life. Years ago, I was playing with the idea of being a volunteer coordinator. I literally called up the volunteer coordinator at the Science Museum, never met her before in my life, called her up out of the blue, introduced myself, and said, I'm so impressed with the volunteers when I visit your museum. I figure the person who's in charge of the program knows what they're doing. Is there any way I could beg 30 minutes of your time to just find out more about the job? 30 minutes seems to be the magic number, and people are very, very willing to talk with you for 30 minutes. I went very organized. I had all of my questions laid out. I asked them, I left the interview, and I decided I didn't want to be a volunteer coordinator anymore. Not because it's a bad job, but because there was a significant component to it that's really not my thing. It's involving spreadsheets and calling people and all that kind of stuff. And I just didn't want to do that. So I definitely chalked this up to a success. I thanked her very much, sent her a thank you note and thanked her for it. And that gave me valuable information about whether I wanted to pursue that. The second informational interview, actually series of informational interviews I did, were the game changer for me. And that was the one that helped me get into a new career. I'm not going to go through the whole long thing, but a career force employee put me in touch with a woman who ran a training company. And she gave me a warm handoff, and I called her up and I said, I have a teaching license, I have a teaching degree, but I have used my teaching skills sporadically and in kind of a gig environment for years. I've never been employed formally Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 as a trainer, and I want to know if I have enough experience to be competitive. I asked her for 30 minutes of her time. I said, would you look at my resume and tell me if you think I have what it takes to compete? Sent her the resume. We met. Oh, we got along like a house of fire. She changed my whole resume. She changed my whole outlook. She gave me valuable things that to this day I'm still teaching. And then, by the way, when I ended, I said, do you have anybody else I should speak with? You always ask for another contact. Is there anybody else who could give me additional information? She, in turn, sent me over to the Dean of Adult Education of Alexandria Tech. I ended up getting a gig job out of that. He, in turn, knew somebody who was at Medtronic, which is closer to what I wanted to do. So again, it was just a series of adding people that knew me and adding and finding out more of what they want, what they're going to want to hear. And this is what they were saying. You know, Robin, you're using the wrong phrase here. You want to be competitive. You want to be able to talk about this. It was huge. Okay, so that's that. Now, setting up a mock interview. Mock interview is just a pretend real interview. And we specialize with those here at Career Force. And you can literally reach out to your local Career Force and say, I need a mock interview. You know, you're basically in the driver's seat, guys. You can do it any way you want. I've had some people say, well, I'm not quite ready to do like a full-on dress rehearsal, but I am ready to just talk through some of the tough questions I have. Could you do that over the phone, Robin? Absolutely, no problem. I had somebody else who said, I'm going to be interviewing for the second time tomorrow. I want to do the whole thing. I want to do it teleconferencing. I want to start. I want you to pretend to be the hiring manager. We went through the whole thing. So either or, we are willing to do that. If it seems like doing a mock interview with us is a little too intimidating, reach out to a friend and family member. Do it over Zoom. But I hope that answers the question, that just reach out to us and we will be more than happy to help you.
Absolutely. Thank you for both of those things. Now, especially towards the beginning, we had some big concerns over employment gaps. You know, somebody said, is it a concern that you've had this gap because of COVID? Somebody else said, I haven't found work in 3 months. Is that going to look bad? How do I talk about that? And somebody else even said, I haven't worked for 11 years. How do I address that? Someone said, I worked a job for 8 days and then I quit. And I'm now fretting over how to present this on an application or in an interview.
Yeah, absolutely. All of those is bringing me back to the Great Recession, where I was unemployed and I was doing all of this informational interviewing and whatnot. Yeah, if you think it's going to be a long haul, and statistics indicate that the older you are, the more it is going to be a long haul to get that next job. There's a couple of things that I would keep in mind. Number one, I do encourage you now, today, to make a commitment to do improvement activities to try to get yourself in, even in a volunteer position. Get yourself in a situation where you can do part-time work or volunteer work, something where you are still being active. And I would say if you can, even volunteer in more or less the area that you want to get into. So in my situation, I was this close to contacting the career force and asking if they needed a volunteer for somebody to present any kind of workshops, because I wanted to put myself in a position to be evaluated by somebody so I could say, hey, I'm currently doing this. Self-improvement activities also is great. So taking classes, if you can, and we will certainly put you in touch with online learning. And there's some of it that is fantastic, that is free. Dislocated Worker might be able to help you get a certificate and pay for it. So there's that option as well. So improvement is going to be important because the chances are they're going to ask you, what have you done to improve yourself during this time? Marnie, I bet Marnie's got something that she wants to add on to.
I just want to call out what's happening in the chat. People are calling for a Coursera extension. I myself have not heard anything about that. I don't know you, Robin.
We got an email because I did join Coursera, and we got an email that they said that they had some ideas of incentives coming along the pike, but it was so vague at that point they couldn't even guesstimate when it's going to happen. So it's possible, but there's nothing at this point.
Right. Okay, next question's very pertinent to this group and part of the reasons that we do this class separately. Legalities. Is it legal for employers to give a psych test? Is it legal for them to ask our date of graduation? What's legal to ask a previous employer?
Yep, absolutely. We run into this. Basically, one of the things that we do reiterate is if a question comes up regarding, asking of your age or something, one of the things we encourage you to do is don't immediately assume that it is wrong or illegal or whatever. The best way to address that is to simply ask them and just say, I'm curious if you could give me more information about why you feel that my age or the date of my graduation, is pertinent to why you're asking this. There's all kinds of reasons why people may ask this question, including hiring managers who aren't very good and don't really realize that this may not be appropriate. I would say, first of all, ask them, um, um, get them to tell you right away. Now, there are also sometimes when it is legal, because, for example, there's going to be certain jobs in bars or whatnot where you need to be over a certain age in order to be able to work. So as I said, I would say just don't necessarily um, uh, assume that every time that there's an uncomfortable question that it may be, illegal or whatever. But on the other hand, also it's fair to say that yes, there is ageism. It does exist. It is a real thing. Um, One thing that I have been advised by a lawyer about is that they said at this particular point, it's very hard to prove. So they said the one reality about ageism is that you may be a victim of it, but to be able to actually prove it can be a very long, very complicated, very tough process. What I would say honestly is, again, ask them. Get more information about why they're asking the questions they're asked, why it's pertinent and important to the position for them to get this information. And then otherwise reach out to us and let's take a look at it in a case-by-case basis. Hopefully that helps.
Yes, thank you so much. People are talking about applications and what's required to allow you to move on in an application, to allow you to submit things. How should you address laid off with no rehire if they press you for an answer on why you're not rehirable?
Sure. Okay. What I would say is this. Again, these are really hard questions to answer in a blanket way because everybody's situation is very unique. And if I knew more specifically about your situation, I could probably come up with a really good response. But not knowing the details, it's really hard. Um, in general, kind of the basic answer that I give everybody in a group like this is keep it short. Give them the information that they need, but don't get into the weeds. That is probably the single most common mistake that people make in interviews is they get asked an uncomfortable question like that and they feel the understandable urge to get into the whole story and to add every single detail. The longer you talk about stuff like this, the more you're creating the suspicion in the mind of the hiring manager. What the heck is going on around here? Because chances are the more emotional you're going to be, whether that be anxious or angry or whatever. The important thing is that you give them the information that they need to know, that you give them factual information. Because again, with background checks, they can find out if this is true or not. And once you have given them the information, move on. Talk about your skills, talk about there are going to be times when it's going to be appropriate for you to reassure them that whatever problem it was that made you leave your last position is no longer going to be a problem for them. There are times indeed when an employer is going to need that reassurance. But again, those are individual cases, and that's much better if you just go to Career Force and ask.
Yes. Okay, so especially in this group, what if you don't want a job where you want to move up? How do you find that kind of company that's okay with letting you stay in a job for a lot of years? And how do you word things if you want to remove some of the past skills, including supervisory positions?
Absolutely. This is great. Whoever asked this question, you are a person after my own heart because I have been in that exact same position. Um, yeah, there are going to be times when, everything in your life is just like, you know what? I just want to cook. I just want to teach. I just want to do this. I just want to do that. I think the big thing that you're going to be able to do there is you need to do your research on the company. And if you can reach out to people and ask them. Glassdoor has become a really, really helpful resource for people. Yes, it used to be a parking lot for the formerly employed who are aggrieved, but now I think it's actually improved quite a bit, and they are trying to give people really helpful descriptions of what the company culture is like and what are the opportunities available and whatnot. So I would say, to the best of your ability, reach out, read, research, meet people who work there, find out, is this a company that, and yes, there are companies that very aggressively try to move their people up the ladder, and they don't understand people who want to just stay at one particular level. That's going to be, to a certain extent, that is going to be research, and then it's also the questions you ask them during the interview. And again, that can be tricky in wording. So again, that's something that you may want to practice with a Career Force staff member. Marnie.
Excellent. So if I could have you answer this one at 2 points in the process. So job
That's
search, we know
complicated,
there,
Marnie.
I know.
She's asking a
So,
lot of me, folks.
right? So how do you let the employer know that you're open for negotiation on your wage or your salary? First, at the point of the applications, which we know is kind of
Mhm.
tough because it's online. And second, say you get to the interview point, how do you handle that?
Absolutely, absolutely. Marty does a great job of kind of talking about the roles of applications and the role of resumes and all of that kind of thing. And one of the things that I'm just going to shamelessly steal from Marty is the thing with the application is that's their document, and you kind of have to follow their rules. If they ask you for a range, you give them a range. If they ask you for a specific number, you're going to pretty much have to do that. They're, as you guys know, frequently they're written to a point where you cannot go further unless you give them that. When it gets into the interview itself, and I would say don't put a salary on a resume at all. The resume is your marketing document to talk about why you are worth the salary that you are asking for. But generally, when we do the interviewing workshop, we talk about let the salary be kind of the last thing you talk about, and preferably never in the first interview. The point of the first interview is to set the stage. The point of the first interview is to basically make your case that you are worth the amount of money that you are asking for. Now, I'm going to back up in just a second, say, you need to do your research ahead of time. You need to go online, and we'll give you the resources, but you need to go online and find out what is a realistic salary that you should be asking for. Somebody of your experience, somebody of your education, in the state in which you're applying for the job, all of that kind of thing. Now, I know some people say, well, I was making this in my last job, so I should be able to ask for that again. Maybe, maybe not. Companies have different ways and means to pay their people what they pay. Just because company A pays you this doesn't necessarily mean company B is committed to that or even thinks that's correct. I don't know. I wouldn't necessarily go just by this is what this one company paid me. I would do thorough research and find out what is realistic in that area. So again, to reiterate, applications pretty much you have to follow what they're asking you and give them what you need. Give them what they need. Your resume, however, is your document. You create that as you see fit. And then keep the actual negotiation to later in the interview process after you've made your case. I think Marnie is probably answering a question in the chat.
I am, yes, sorry. I am trying my best to
Multitasker.
do as much as we can. This has been a lively group and we really appreciate it. So we hope that you use this as a springboard and that you continue to contact your local Career Force staff for questions. Let's do one more. I just put some information in there in response to, can dislocated worker help me with computer skills like Excel and PowerPoint? What can dislocated worker help them with, Robin? Can you reiterate that?
Oh man, dislocated worker is cool. And again, what they can help you with really kind of depends. Again, it's a case by case basis. And you hear there's different agencies doing dislocated worker. It isn't just training and licensing. I've even said that, oh God, I think somebody was telling me about a professor that really wanted to present a paper for some kind of important conference, and it was really important in their career, and they actually paid for this conference. So it isn't always training, it can be other things. But it's basically just limited funds. I mean, they're not going to be able to pay for a 4-year degree, but then I'm sure you know that. It's going to be a limited kind of training, a limited kind of, if I have this, it might even be that they can afford to pay to buy you software that you need to be able to do the job at home, or to be able to learn how to do the job at home. There's any number of things that they can do, that they can help you with. The other cool thing about Dislocated Workers is that you also get a counselor. So they're working side by side with you, and they're looking for you, and they're consulting with you on a regular basis as well. All right.
Okay, just a
Anything we got?
couple more
My clock
minutes.
says, yep, 2 minutes. Let's go for it. Let's go for one more. Come on, this is fun.
Okay, all right. So I think you touched on this, but just one more time, asking about a more neutral way to say you quit your last job. One person asks, can I use the term reduction in force, or RIF?
If that's the way it happened, absolutely. Yeah. If you are unemployed now because they restructured, because they reduced their staff, because they partially closed, or they, absolutely. If that is why they did it, say it. By the way, I want to I'm going to let this be the last thing that we deal with, but I got to share a really powerful story that happened not terribly long ago. I was working with a woman who was let go. She was utterly convinced that her boss let her go because her boss didn't like her, and there was all this animosity, and she didn't know how to answer this question about why were you let go? And she was really, really struggling. And I said, I'm not going to kid you. This isn't going to be fun. It is probably not going to be a great thing. But if you want to, you can call your boss and ask and just clarify. And bless her heart, she did. She showed tremendous courage. She called him up, and he was like, "Oh, no, 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 no." He says, "No, he said it wasn't a fit for a lot of reasons. We talked about it, but honestly, you're great. You're wonderful, and there's things that you do that nobody else has been able to do as well as you. But why don't you just say we reduced the staff?" And he gave her permission to say, "This is what the thing. We reduced staff, we restructured. This is what we did." She left it feeling so much better. Now, that's a personal choice, whether you want to do that or not, and you may not, and you may not be in that position. But I would say is if it's something as, COVID, reduced our business by half, and they couldn't afford me, they reduced, they restructured, my job was eliminated. That gets happened a lot too, where literally your job does not come back. Nobody fills in for you. That job is disappeared. And so you can literally say at that point, my job was eliminated. So if there's any questions at all specifically about your particular situation, give us a call and we'll let you know. Okay, my clock says 11:01.